Hello guys, welcome to Different Shades Make a Change, where young people talk Black history. I'm your host Shinama Bokolo, and today we'll be talking about racism. And our guest here today is Nzinga Gomez.
Hello, hi.
Hi Nzinga, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
So today we'll be talking about racism, and this is a very huge subject, but it's also very sensitive.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So we all know that during 2020,
Yeah.
racism was the forefront of media due to the death of George Floyd, a 46-year-old Black man who was murdered by a white police officer.
Yes, and with that happened, it just put in the spotlight as well the racial injustice that is happening in the US, especially in America, for so long.
Yeah.
But it's just making as well, sparking a massive protest around the world. But it's something that we only, the world, just knew about it. But this is something that for Americans, for African Americans, is something that it's normal. It happens every day. For them, it's just normalized.
Yeah. It's not the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yes.
Yeah.
And with the Black Lives Matter, not only people start to, around the world, to talk about racism in general, not just in America, but all over the world.
Yeah.
And if we go, for instance, specifically to America, and we go and we talk about back in history, and we start with the US, we're going to have to talk about all the struggles that African Americans endure. It's a rich and varied story of accomplishment and as well segregation, oppression and development, slavery and independence. And a lot of us, we're not even aware that, for instance, in 1400s, it was when you had free Africans and as well others that went captive to Americas. So what ended up happening is that you had, from Africa, those who were enslaved, you had women, men, children who were captive, and they were forced out of their own countries and just taken into slavery. And whilst this was happening, you have to understand as well that when all this kidnap history happened throughout the history of slavery, not just in Americas, you have as well Europeans, colonizers, who would go, kidnap a lot of African people and then do the slave trade from Portuguese to the Brazil, from other Europeans to like the British Empire to the West Indies and Americas, and this happened, and it is a lot. It is a lot. Racism. When we talk about racism, we have to talk about and we have to understand the root of it. And even later, when we are looking at about what it became symbolic of the early years of Black history in the United States, we can go back to, for instance, 1619, when you start to talk about more, because is when you have a huge spurt of slaves who are now living outside their countries, uprooted of their own identities, of their own families and their own lands, and deprived and dehumanized.
Yeah, the fate of enslaved people in the United States divided nation during the Civil War, and after the war, the racist legacy of slavery persisted, and it caused movements to happen, like the Underground Railroad, the Montgomery bus boycott, the Selma to the Montgomery March, and later on the Black Lives Matter movement. So moving it onto our home turf, what about racism in the United Kingdom?
Oh my God, that's huge. If we're going to talk about racism in the United Kingdom, we have to go back as well to, if you're going to see what happened in the 17th and 18th centuries, there was a lot of families, and not just wealthy families who were slave owners. We have in the history information and research that was made in 1833, after the abolishment of slavery. You will see families and others from clergy and other, low-class families who had slaves. And after the abolishment, what a lot of people do not know, and even you as a young person, every single person who was a taxpayer, for instance, until 2015, were paying tax to dividends of slave owners' families.
Wait, really?
Yes, let me just explain to you why. After the abolishment of the slavery, what ended up happening is that the British Treasury had to make a loan of £20 million, this in 1833, to pay those who are slave owners. So you have people paying reparation until 2015. We all as taxpayers, I was shocked when I was reading a lot about it. I was like, so I've been paying tax to pay slave owners until 2015. Part of my tax was to do it until 2015 because it was when the debt was finished. So they made this loan of £20 million at that time, 1833, and they only even though were able to pay the debt in 2015. So every single person that was working and paying their taxes until 2015 were paying tax to slave owners. Even myself, your mom, family members, family relations, and we didn't know about it.
I never even knew about that.
Yeah, a lot of people, they don't know about it, and those are the kind of things that happen. You have as well, London in the middle of 18th century was the largest city with black population, and you had people who were still free, people who were as well in runaway, people who were still slaves, and some of them, suffering discrimination, looking for jobs, and they were living and begging on the roads in the streets because they couldn't find a job.
Owners of African slaves in England, they would advertise slave sales.
Yep.
If it wasn't for William Wilberforce, they wouldn't have abolished slavery until it was 1809.
Yeah. Well, when it happened, the abolishment of slavery with Wilberforce, it doesn't mean that it stopped racism.
Yeah.
Let's just go back a little bit in history. For instance, throughout the time that British Empire and as well European empires had slaves, for instance, just from the British empires and the ships, the transatlantic ships that were transporting slaves across the Atlantic. Imagine that you have 3 million people who enter the ships to do this transatlantic trip.
3 million.
And from those 3 million, 1 million died and they were thrown in the sea. The Atlantic Sea is a cemetery, is a sea of sorrows. Literally a sea of sorrows. You had 1 million slaves, African slaves, who died through the transatlantic slave trade, and they were thrown in the sea.
So
literally.
Right now, there would be 1 million bodies in there.
You have more than 1 million bodies because if you're going to count, not just, I'm talking about just the British, they were surpassed only by the Portuguese doing the slave trade to Brazil. But if you think about all European colonizers who took slaves all across the Atlantic, you're not just talking about 1 million corpses there. You have more than that. And it's very sad because a lot of people, they don't understand the impact of when they transported these people, and you uprooted someone who had a family or was someone with their own identity, their own culture, their own lives. You kidnap them, put them in a ship. Do you dehumanize that person, and then you trade that person like a cargo, like a product?
I can't even imagine that.
We can't imagine, but this is history, and a lot of this history needs to be told. If we talk about racism, it's about the behavior that was acknowledged, that was taught, and it was a systemically programmed, well thought, well designed to dehumanize and to make sure that you stay in your life as a black person. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So, throughout history, even in the UK and across the world, you see leaders, you see entrepreneurs, you see inventors. A lot of young people, they don't know about Black history because what you guys are taught in school, you don't know that, for instance, they're amazing leaders to inspire people, not just Nelson Mandela, amongst others, Martin Luther King, you have Malcolm X, you have Rosa Parks, you have Du Bois, you have amongst, immense, and apart from those leaders, you have inventors, you have entrepreneurs, a lot of people, they listen a little bit about some of them, but they don't know the histories, things that are just hidden from you guys as young people. And sometimes because there's not a strong platform to allow you to understand who you are, from inventors to scientists to others, you don't know who you are, you don't know where you're going, you don't know, and this perpetuates racism because it's something that is stripping you of knowledge that will empower you and will empower. Yeah, and we should learn about it more, and and it's something that affects all of us, not just, for instance, you guys as young people. If I'm going to talk about my experiences as an adult with racism, is a lot, from things like start with a normal name calling, and other things that happen, until today for me is something that we and my generation, we had to fight against it. But I would like to ask you as well one question. What about you? Tell me about your experiences of racism.
Well, like you said, there's constant name callings. Like I've been called monkey,
really, still
button picker. I've been sort of bug out because it's in my nature since I'm black. I just feel like society, they like normalize it, like they don't treat it like importantly. It's just like a whatever thing.
Yeah, but tell me something. Those people, and where do you experience this? Do you experience, amongst your peers in the streets, or where? For instance, in school, where this happen, for instance?
Well, I guess you would say like peers, because it's mostly the things that I heard told to me in school, and people like around my age.
Okay.
And recently there was like something happened with someone else who was younger, who was
really?
Calling someone I know names, and I feel like people dismiss it because of how young people are, but like it's, and like this, like they don't, they're basically saying it's okay. Like I get that they're young, but you need to also like show them that it's not okay.
Yeah, it's not okay, and I do agree with you 100%. I'm 100% with that, because racism is not something that you are born with. It's something that is taught.
Yeah.
So the same way that behavior is a behavior, behaviors are taught, and behaviors can be unlearned. Like you learn and you unlearn, and this is what it needs to be happening. Those thoughts and those behaviors, they need to be unlearned for us to move forward. Yeah.
Well, we could talk about this going on and on and on and on.
Yeah,
so we have to end it here.
Yeah, we need to.
So, well, thank you for coming.
No, thank you so much for having me.
This is Different Shades Make a Change, where young people talk Black history. I hope you've enjoyed this episode and hope you continue watching more.